All right, welcome back to the endocrine system part 4. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with this anime. It is so good. It is Cowboy Bebop, and it is the theme for the endocrine system. Why? I don't know, but I like it. All right, so we're going to talk about a couple of diseases. Again, there's so very many that go wrong with the endocrine system. We're just going to touch base on a couple of the most common ones. So one is due to growth hormone. There's something called acromegaly and gigantism. Both are due to excessively high levels of growth hormone in the body. You'll notice this individual right here. Here's an average-sized person. This person has gigantism. You can see they're almost twice the size of a regular adult male. And I'll tell you a little bit more about this person in a second. So again, they both result from excess growth hormone. The difference is who the condition affects. So adults will develop acromegaly, children develop gigantism. So gigantism basically occurs when there's too much growth hormone before those growth plates fuse, right? That's what allows them to grow tall, right? However, once growth plates have fused, the growth hormone can't make you grow any taller. The growth plates have fused. There's nowhere for your bones to grow to. So it causes acromegaly. So instead of growing in height, it causes your bones to kind of change their shape sometimes, as well as your organ size. So people who have acromegaly will have like really pronounced foreheads, very thick jaws, very wide noses. They'll have like barrel chests because like the rib cage can't get any like bigger, so it ends up getting like kind of wider. There's a number of other growth things that the growth hormone will affect, like it'll cause like a massive enlargement of the heart, for example. It can cause damage in nerves because like the bones at the ends grow a little bit. Well, it's part of the gigantism acromegaly kind of crossover, but like sometimes the bones will grow so quickly that it actually pinches on nerves. The passageways for nerves aren't as open as they would be for most people. In the case of this individual, his name is Robert Wadlow, and you can kind of see he was alive somewhere around the 1920s or so. And in his case, he had a tumor on his anterior pituitary that prevented him from ever going through puberty. So his growth plates never closed. And so he just kept growing big, like up. He never actually developed acromegaly. He probably would have continued to grow, but what happened to him is like you can't, I'll try to say this the best I can, like you can't just have a person look basically the same proportions as a person and keep growing infinitely up. Like at some point, the physics of our body structure aren't good for a certain height. Okay, hopefully that makes sense to you. That's why most animals that are very tall don't look like humans, because there's a certain size that you now have to have like other load-bearing kind of positions. And anyway, so he needed braces to help him stand and to walk. I mean, I think of like 1920s. These were like some of those very rudimentary kind of metallic braces. Well, what happened was one of those braces rubbed like a raw spot near his ankle. And because he had like kind of problems with circulation because of his height as well, he didn't, and loss of like kind of sensation down by his feet, he didn't realize that it had rubbed like, like basically a sore on by his ankle. And it ended up getting infected, and he ended up passing away from the infection at a very young age, I think like early 20s. Because again, there's no antibiotics back then that could easily have helped them. Let's talk about a few thyroid-related diseases. You may have heard of goiter in the past. So goiter is basically an excessive growth of the thyroid gland. You can see this individual. I'm not exactly sure when this picture was taken, but again, you can kind of see maybe the quality of the house behind her. So this is, turn of like the 1900s kind of picture. Goiter is basically this enlarged growth of the thyroid where it causes this bulge in the neck. Usually it is due to iodine deficiency, or it was at least back in the day. So iodine, I didn't mention this to you earlier, but for thyroid hormones, both T3 and T4, the major building block is iodine. So if you don't have enough iodine in your diet, your thyroid hormone, your thyroid gland cannot produce the thyroid hormones. So what ends up happening is the thyroid gland says, well, I guess I don't have enough thyroid hormone, not because I don't have enough iodine, but rather I'm not big enough to produce enough. So it keeps growing and growing and growing, trying to get big enough to produce enough thyroid hormone until you get this hyperthyroidism, basically this overactive, enlarged thyroid gland, and then you get this big goiter of a bulge on your neck. I hope that makes sense. I mean, these days, like our modern diet, that's if you look at like your table salt, they usually have like iodized table salt, right? If you get like sort of that like larger blue shaker of it, they like the government just adds iodine to it because it's part of like a public health campaign, right? To make sure that we naturally have iodine in our diets, so we can avoid, goiter and other kind of illnesses related to thyroid hormone deficiency. Now, most of the most common forms of hyperthyroidism or overactive thyroid is Graves' disease. And you can see there's too much of that T4, right? Again, that less active form of thyroid hormone. One of the common signs of it will be sort of this where eyes seem to be like bulging a little bit, as well as, you can see this heat intolerance. There's usually some anxiety that goes with it, as well as what's known as diffuse goiter. So there will be an enlargement in that neck area, but not nearly as pronounced as the image you saw a moment ago. It's a slight enlargement. So if you feel sort of like an enlargement in your throat, you might want to go and get that checked out. The opposite of hyperthyroidism, right, is going to be hypothyroidism. Basically, this is where there is, instead of excessive activity of the thyroid gland, now it is a below normal activity level of the thyroid gland. And there's two different types in general. I'm sure there's probably more than just that, but these are the two main ones. There's something called congenital hypothyroidism. This is due to, this is due at birth. And this is due to a nutritional deficiency in iodine. Again, it tends not, and again, this is at a young age, right? It tends not to be an issue in our country because, again, we have very salty foods and we have salt is everywhere. And again, it has iodine in it. But that lack of thyroid hormone can prevent proper physical as well as mental growth. Because remember, your thyroid hormones are helping regulate the some chemical processes in the body. So if cells are not able to properly metabolize things and build and grow, that's going to affect the growth of neurons in the brain and things like that. More common in our country would be something called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And this is an autoimmune disease where basically the immune system attacks the thyroid gland, eventually leading to the loss of it. So again, our thyroids usually work just fine because we have plenty of iodine, so that's not the issue. But sometimes it is an autoimmune disease where simply our immune system simply decides, nope, not you, thyroid. It doesn't, and the immune system sometimes does not understand that it's attacking ourselves. So in any case, again, most common in America these days is going to be Hashimoto's thyroiditis. We'll have two different adrenal diseases. They'll be similarly set up. So Cushing's is where is resulting from very high or excessively high levels of cortisol. There's a short video you can watch about an individual who has Cushing's syndrome and just the impacts that it had on her life. Unfortunately, she passed away not too long ago from complications due to Cushing's syndrome. But anyway, it's an interesting watch, so you have the link there if you're interested. It's not too long. It can be, so anyway, the reason why you might have very high levels of cortisol, it's possible that the issue is at the level of the pituitary gland, where that tumor is causing the release of too much adrenocorticotropin hormone, which if you remember back, that is what stimulates the release of cortisol. So by having too much ACTH, it stimulates too much cortisol, so levels are too high. Or the problem might be at the level of the adrenal gland, and since that tumor is in the adrenal gland, it's causing it directly to simply release too much cortisol. So if you kind of think of the things that cortisol does, it can, again, this is your stress hormone, so things that you would want under a temporary stressful situation would be high blood pressure because you're trying to run away from or fight off something. You want more sugar in your bloodstream because it needs to be taken to working muscles so that they can make ATP to, again, run away from or, fight off something. However, under chronic situations, not great. It also, in chronic situations, it no longer helps readjust the immune system, but now causes a suppression in the immune system, and that can lead to more infections. It can lead to insulin resistance, which can then lead to diabetes, and then you get what's known as stigmata, or sort of the telltale signs of Cushing's syndrome. So an individual's face might be very rounded. They may have basically muscle weakness and thin limbs. So in general, they'll have like a thick torso and abdominal area, but then proportionally very skinny arms and legs. You may see growth of hair. This will probably be more pronounced in women than in men. There'll be a lump of adipose tissue on the back of the neck. You can kind of see that in this image here. They used to call that a buffalo hump. It's not very nice, but that's what they called it. And they also called that swollen face a moon face, which also is not very nice. But and usually due to that kind of swelling in the torso abdominal area, they'll cause some stretch marks over the abdominal area. And then you'll notice there's a few other things that also can be caused. But again, these are sort of your these are the stigmata that normally, or the telltale signs that an individual may have Cushing's disease. Now, the opposite of too much cortisol is too little, and that's called Addison's disease. In general, it can be due to the adrenal gland not being lost due to a disease. Perhaps the individual never had a properly functioning adrenal gland in the first place, like it never formed correctly during development, or it simply is not functioning properly. So maybe there's a tumor that's preventing its functioning from working properly. In this case, so again, we're having too little cortisol, so things that can be affected, like you might be vomiting and diarrhea, so it affects the digestive tract, and that can lead to dehydration. Instead of high blood pressure and high blood sugar like we saw before, we now have low blood pressure and hypoglycemia, so very, very low blood sugar. Not surprisingly, if you have low blood pressure and then very little sugar available to cells, that can impact how neurons function. So it's going to cause issues maybe with how your brain is processing information, so it can cause confusion. Sometimes very disorders, like a psychosis kind of situations. Sometimes it may even affect speech. It can affect the energy levels of a person. So lethargy is where the person is feeling very they feel like they have very little energy, right? It's very, very tired. And then there's sort of the stigmata here is going to be this discoloration or bronzing of the skin. And they tried showing that in this image. So on the right side of the individual, but left side of this image would be this woman's normal colors. And if she had Addison's disease, you can kind of see how the skin is it's like an interesting bronzy kind of color. It's not quite the natural, it's almost like a weird yellow tan, or a yellowish tinge to a tan. That's the telltale sign of Addison's disease. And one of the big issues is that because that cortisol is so important in helping regulate our system or helping us deal with a stressful event, when people with Addison's disease face a stressful event, they have a problem maintaining circulation, so their blood pressure can drop and they can go into shock. So a stressful event like a car accident or some other injury that might be, I guess, less deadly for someone else can actually be deadly for someone with Addison's disease. Okay, we're at our next checkpoint, so I'm going to stop this video here, and if you have any questions, please let me know.